This is the third lecture on Chapter E. I'll be speaking today about musical texture. Remember in the first lecture on Chapter D, where we looked at a Bach chorale setting, and I talked about how we could think of musical texture as being kind of like a textile or a cloth. There are threads that go this way horizontally, and those are the individual melodies of the different parts. Then there are threads that go this way, they're vertical, and those represent the chords. And when we look at a piece of music, we can think of the music as being sort of a woven textile with those vertical and horizontal threads interwoven like so. Here's that piece of music again. Remember, we looked at the individual lines of the soprano part, the alto part, the tenor part, and the bass part. And we realized that we could understand this piece both as a series of horizontal lines happening at the same time, but also as a series of vertical chords happening one after the other. Here it is. We'll talk a little bit more about this example in a minute when we put it into a category along with the other different kinds of musical texture. Let's go ahead to Chapter E now. Okay, so this is some information straight from your textbook. I thought it would be good to share the actual textbook with you because the textbook has some boldface terms, and these are terms that you should know. So we might want to highlight terms like monophonic or polyphonic. Okay, first of all, monophonic music is music where there is a single melody. Most commonly, that's a single melody played by one instrument or sung by one voice. But it could also be a melody that's played in octaves by more than one instrument or sung in octaves by more than one voice. The word polyphony and the word counterpoint mean the same thing. Or we could say that polyphonic music is the same thing as contrapuntal music. Polyphony or contrapuntal music is music where there's more than one line and the lines are independent of each other. Here's an example of polyphony by J.S. Bach. There's a right-hand part for the keyboard and a left-hand part for the keyboard, and they remain independent from each other and somewhat separate. This is an example of non-imitative polyphony. The two lines are doing their own thing, and they're not in any particular relationship with each other, except of course that the composer has made sure that they'll sound good together. Here, on the other hand, is an example of imitative polyphony. The alto voice starts us off and sings Benedictus qui, and so on. Then a little bit later, the tenor comes in and sings the same thing, a perfect fourth lower. Notice the clef that the tenor is using. He's singing using a different kind of tenor clef. It looks like a treble clef, but the little 8 tells us that it sounds an octave lower. So this note is actually a D4. Then the bass comes in, and the bass sings the same thing, an octave lower than the alto, and a perfect fifth lower than the tenor. As you can perhaps hear, there are other places where imitation is used. That is, where one voice sings a melodic fragment or part of a melodic line, and another voice immediately follows with the same line, either a little higher or a little bit lower. You could think of this imitation as being sort of a call and response, if you will. So that's imitative counterpoint. The third type of texture, besides monophonic texture and polyphonic texture, is homophonic texture. Homophonic texture can take one of two forms. The first is that it can be a melody plus an accompaniment. And when we say it's a melody plus an accompaniment, sometimes the accompaniment is a very separate thing, and then sometimes there can also be a supporting parallel melody. In this example by Joseph Haydn, we have both things. In the beginning, the right hand or the treble clef part has the melody, and there's an accompaniment in the left hand, which is really quite different from the melody. In measure 3, though, the melody goes up and descends D, C sharp, B, B, A, G sharp. And for a little bit, there's a supporting parallel melody in parallel sixths with the melody. That's also very common. So unlike polyphony or contrapuntal music, where all of the lines are meant to be equal, of equal importance, and independent of each other, in homophonic music, there's usually one line that is the most important, and the other parts are accompaniment. Here's another example of homophony.
Ich war der 16 Sommer alt und schon dich und nicht weiter.
And there's another type of homophony, in addition to the melody plus accompaniment type that we've just been talking about. Another type of homophony is what we call chorale texture. And it's the texture that we heard in that Bach chorale setting that I played for you before we turned to the other examples in the textbook. The reason that this is an example of homophony is that the soprano line is likely heard as the melody, with the other parts being subordinate. But chorale texture is a little bit of a compromise between a homophonic texture and a polyphonic texture, because in chorale texture there are also independent lines, independent horizontal lines of music. The textbook also uses the term homorhythmic to describe the chorale texture. Homorhythmic means that the voices have the same or nearly the same rhythm. These are the things that you need to know from Chapter E. We will be going over them in class. Please think about what questions you might have to ask about Chapter E. Thank you.